Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. The Super Nintendo had a library of wonderfully odd games, as well as its share of releases that shaped the gaming world as a whole. Several titles showed everyone that games didn't need to be basic arcade titles anymore. They could instead be long adventures that include interesting stories and have in-depth worlds that are more than just a background. Today we'll be looking at a game released towards the end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle, Gunple Gunman's Proof. Gunple was published by ASCII in 1997 and developed by Lennar, a relatively unknown company. Their most notable release was Deadly Towers on the NES in 1986, which received great commercial success with mixed reviews at the time. Gunple is a clear-cut clone of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, with a few minor changes. The change that stands out the most is the way the player attacks. Instead of close-range swordplay, the player fires a pistol at enemies. With the use of the shoulder buttons, the player can strafe, locking in a certain direction while shooting. They can also punch, but doing so isn't very effective. Bullets allow for quicker attacks at longer distances with no noticeable difference in damage to a punch. The game also has a screen that's almost identical to A Link to the Past's inventory screen. However, instead of items, it lists the player's available skills. Power-up items are found throughout the game, including different types of temporary guns and a carrot. We'll explain that later. Another contrast to A Link to the Past is that the game uses a lives system. If the player dies, they will be revived on the spot with their health fully recovered. If the player runs out of lives, they'll get a game over and respawn in the player's home village. The player can also find chests in dungeons. The treasures inside are converted into points once a dungeon is finished. Completing the dungeon quickly or with a lot of life remaining will award even more points. As the player is using guns and doesn't have any sort of shield, attacks can be actively dodged by using the crouch button. This lets players avoid gunfire by ducking underneath bullets, though the player can't fire while crouched. The player can also gain special skills, like a charge shot used by holding down the attack button. The game's story takes place in the year 1880. Two meteors crash into the Earth on a small island near the western coast of North America. However, nobody seems to care. It isn't until some time later, when monsters appear and attack villages, that people start to worry. After the monsters attack their victims, they drop crests inscribed with the word Demi-Seed, which comes to describe the monsters themselves. One day, the game's protagonist, a young farm boy who lives in the only town on the island, finds a crash-landed miniature UFO. Two mini-aliens emerge from the ship, known as Zero and Garrow. They inform the player that an intergalactic criminal named Demi has escaped justice and is hiding on the island, and that they are in fact space sheriffs. Zero then possesses the player's body, granting him the power to fight the monsters. Together, Zero and the player must destroy Demi, thereby restoring peace to the island. During the adventure, the player meets up with Mono, another alien who crash-landed while hunting Demi. Unfortunately, Mono possessed the body of a horse named Roboton and is unable to escape it. He joins the player in his quest and can be summoned by collecting a carrot, allowing the player to ride him and become temporarily invincible. Graphically, it's clear that the game's backgrounds are directly influenced by A Link to the Past, but with character sprites closer to the minimalistic style of Mother 3. The comparisons between Zelda and Gunple are made even more obvious by the dungeon map screen. As you can see, the screen is almost exactly the same as Zelda's. Altogether, Gunple takes a lot from A Link to the Past, but it at least has a unique approach with its theme and gun-based gameplay. Notable names attached to the project include Isami Nakagawa, who worked on the game's packaging artwork. Nakagawa became popular with his work on Poguri, a Japanese manga series. Also attached to the title was Akihito Tomisawa, a designer and scenario writer who previously worked at Game Freak. Several years after Gunple's release, he mentioned his dissatisfaction with the final game, saying, "Inspired by my favorite Western dramas, I wanted to make a game based on Mr. Isami Nakagawa's character. However, there were several obstacles, such as communication with the company programming the game didn't go well, and it was commercialized without my consent. My ideas are reflected in a part of the basic idea, but the final release is completely different from what I had initially intended. I was deeply aware of the difficulty of making games in a freelance position. If given permission, it's a game I would remake." The game was likely never localized in the West because of its late publishing date, but there might be another, more sad reason. as it seems Gunple was in fact Lenar's last developed game. It's possible it sold too poorly for the company to remain active in the gaming market. If the company was struggling financially, publishing the title internationally was not an option. From the sounds of the quote from Tomisawa, it's possible they were only just able to release the game commercially in Japan, as the game appears to have been rushed out without Tomisawa's consent. Luckily, the game received a fan translation from Aeon Genesis. If you think Gunple is interesting, why not take a look at our video on Japan's exclusive Satellaview Zelda games. We'll also be streaming some of Gunple on Wednesday, the 7th of June on our second channel, so why not join us there? Maybe you could even subscribe to keep up with our future content. My name is Dazz, and this has been Region Locked.